Hey, it's Brian, your home investing live stream. And today I'm going to talk about lease purchases, sandwich lease purchases. Now, generally, we talk about buying properties and taking ownership in your own name. That's absolutely our preferable way to do it, with seller financing, owner financing, some kind of creative financing deal. So they're basically like a bank. The seller's like a bank. In fact, sometimes in the scripts, we explain it that way. If they're having trouble understanding how seller financing, and some people have never even heard that term. So you explain it, well, you're like the bank. Now you obviously, we own the property, but we make payments to you. Or they're a mortgage company. Now, if they want to do a sandwich lease purchase, sometimes there's 7 reasons why you're going to want to do a sandwich lease purchase. Sometimes it'll actually be your choice. Sometimes it's the seller's choice. They just don't want to sell it to you that way. They don't want to deed it over to you and leave the mortgage in their name, and they're just not so comfortable doing it that way. But lease purchase or rent to own. Now, we use rent to own a lot, that terminology in the scripts. People tend to understand rent to own a little better in some areas. If your audience base, if your customer base is pretty savvy on real estate and they've seen enough signs that say lease purchase, they may understand what a lease purchase or a lease option is. For my my target audience here in our area, we just didn't get the response when we put that in the advertising. That's how you figure out whether people are savvy on stuff. You put it on the signs, and if nobody calls, you change the signs, and then people start calling, then obviously that messaging works. All you're trying to do is find messaging that gets the phone to ring. So rent to own, and when you're explaining it to the seller, that's a simpler way to approach it. In fact, one thing we're doing a lot now, and this is an occasion where you may do a sandwich lease purchase, is if you're talking to a landlord, and guys, there's a lot of landlords out there right now that are not happy, disgruntled landlords who you should be calling. And these landlords may be willing, hey, you've got the house up for rent. Would you consider doing a rent to own? See, even just the verbiage is so close, rent to own. But if you say, I see that you're renting the house, would you consider a lease purchase? It just doesn't ring the right way. It doesn't hit the ear the right way, the same way. So you want to make it seem simple to your folks. I've got a roaming puppy here. Let me grab her. Yes, this is our new baby. Yeah, she was getting into trouble over there. Yes, this is S'mores. Yes. Oh, she's adorable. She is a Bernedoodle, and she doesn't know anything about lease purchases, but I'm going to hold her here. So, guys, I'm going to give you one big warning on lease purchases, that if you don't set it up right, you can have a real problem, okay? When you buy a house on a lease purchase, I may as well tell you, no, I'll save it for the end. Okay, you want to go down, baby? You want to go down? She's really very sweet, and she'll be about 60 or 70 pounds in a year. Yikes. She's pretty big right now. She's only 2 months old, and she's already bigger than the Shih Tzus. Okay, she's like 11 pounds. So when to use a lease purchase? There's 3 main closing calls, and the main one that you're going to use probably, 70, 80% of the time is the seller financing closing call. So that's in your blue manual, your closing guide, your closing call guide, and then the other 3, the big 3, really, you should write this down. If I say, what are the big 3? Type them in. What are the big 3 closing calls in the creative financing world? Who can type that in? Type in any one of the 3. Well, you know one of the 3 because I've been talking about it, and that's sandwich lease purchases. Okay, and the other 2 I did mention, seller financing, and there's only one other one, and that's subject to. So those are like your big 3. Oh, those are your big 3 closing calls. I just realized I'm not wearing my mic. I've never done that before. Forgot to put my mic on. Okay, so those are your big 3 closing calls. And generally, guys, you're going to defer to the seller financing closing call. That's the one I want you using almost all the time. Okay, now there's reasons to use a sandwich lease purchase. Let's go through these. Number one, if your state or the state you're buying the house in has very high transfer taxes. There's some states where it'll cost you 3%, 4% to buy a house. And so you just don't want to take on those taxes, especially those closing costs, especially if it's a very expensive home. If you got an $800,000 house and it's a good deal, you know what? That's even more of our strategy sometimes. You know, that's true. Normally, I really don't like to do sandwich lease purchases. I don't own the house. I'm not in the position of power like I want to be. And but if you have an $800,000 house and it's going to cost you, you know, $15,000 just to take the property into your name, and you only have 2 or 3 years, or, you know, not a really long term, it may not be worth it to do that, because, you know, that's a huge cost. So that's, you know, high state transfer taxes. Now, if you're buying a $110,000 house, even if your, you know, transfer taxes are quite high, you might pay $5 or $6 grand or something like that for a close. And that's yes, that's expensive, and it's a good percentage in the deal. However, I'd rather have you do that, probably because it's not going to break the bank, $5 or $6 grand, and you're going to get all that money back from your lease purchase buyer's non-refundable option deposit. So that in those smaller cases, I'd probably take on the cost, buy the house, take it in your name. But again, if it's $1 million house but a good deal, maybe that's when you do the sandwich lease purchase, because of those high transfer taxes. They call them dock stamps in Florida. Different states call them different things, but whatever it's called, transfer taxes. Number two, if they only give you a short time, now obviously we're trying for 30 years, we're trying for the whole rest of their mortgage period, a long period of time. But if they will only give you 2 years, it may not be worth it to take it into your name, especially if you're putting someone in there who's going to turn this thing around quickly. The number three, and especially if the seller's fighting you. If the seller wants to do a lease purchase and they're only going to do 2 years anyway, it's probably not worth the battle. However, remember that you're going to try to get extensions on everything that you get a short term on. If you get 2 years or 3 years on something, you're absolutely going to try to get a longer time. You're going to try 18 months from the end of seller financing. Write that down. These little golden nuggets. 18, you should set it up in your CRM. 18 months from the end of the seller financing, you should be calling your seller and negotiating an extension. Number three, and this is a big one that you do run into sometimes, is the seller's freaked out about the due on sale clause. Somebody told them about it, or their attorney mentioned it to them, or something like that. And yes, when the title transfers, technically the mortgage company does have the right, although not the obligation, and it's not a law, they have the right to call the mortgage due, which basically means they're going to start a foreclosure proceeding. Now, does a bank want to start a foreclosure proceeding on a property that they're getting good monthly payments on? No, generally not. So even if they find out the title transfers, you know, a lot of times they're not going to proceed with that. But if the seller just can't get over it and won't sign the paperwork where he's going to deed the property over to you, then you say, okay, well, let's just do it this way. We'll do a sandwich lease purchase. We don't take the deed. You know, the deed stays in your name. What's the downside of that? What's the downside of any sandwich lease purchase is you can't claim depreciation, which can be very valuable. You don't get the value. Okay, this is an interesting point. If you write this correctly, you will get the benefit of the principal reduction. That's a whole nother session. But don't write an agreement where you're a lease purchase agreement where you're not getting credit for the principal reduction. If you're writing it up that way, call me and I'll tell you how to write it the right way. Okay. If it's a really skinny deal, number four, not getting much free equity, tiny margins, and especially if that's one kind of plays into number five, which is you're not so sure about the market. You're not sure about the value. So if you're paying, you know, if it's a $300,000 property and, you know, they'll give it to you for $320,000 and you think, you know, and all the other numbers work, they'll do it for nothing down, they'll give you a long term and it's a good spread every month, you know, so you'd pay the higher price, but maybe you don't buy in and take the property. Remember, with a lease purchase, and lease option is the same two words. Lease purchase, lease option means the same thing. On a lease option, you have an option to walk away, and they understand that. Whereas if you buy the house, take the mortgage into your own name, you might have a balloon payment coming up where you're supposed to cash them out by but a lot of times they'll give you extensions on that, okay? Number 6, sometimes there's some kind of a lien that has to get cleared, or sometimes there's actually a new mortgage. We did a deal not that long ago where it's a first-time home buyer mortgage where they get a special rate on the mortgage. They put nothing down and stuff, but they have to stay in the house for 3 years, or they have to stay in the mortgage for 3 years. So we did a sandwich lease purchase on that one because of the terms on the mortgage. So that might play into it as well. Okay, and then this last one, number 7, and this may be the biggest one and the most important reason why you might do this, is some sellers want a ton. If you talk about seller financing, they say, oh, yeah, I'll do seller financing, but 20% down, or they'll, ask for some huge amount down. So obviously you don't want to pay a big amount down. And sometimes you can switch strategies there and say, well, you know what? Sometimes we do it with seller financing, but sometimes we do it with lease purchase. Now, when we do these lease purchase, it's essentially the same numbers we were talking about, the same monthly payment and the same purchase price. But the difference is that, when I pay I might pay 10 or 20% down if we're doing seller financing like what you were asking. But when we do these sandwich lease purchases, usually we just do first and last month's rent. So if you can, explain that to them and change, and this happens all the time, guys, where you can swing a $20,000 ask, because why are they even asking this? Because somebody told them and they read a book or they got this idea in their head. It's not like they need the money. They don't need that 20% down. They just think that that's how it should work. So when you explain that, hey, but with lease purchases, this is how it works, you go, oh, okay, it works that way then. Okay, I see. And so that's another good reason to do a sandwich lease purchase. Generally, again, get the deed or get the door. You get the depreciation. You're in more of a position of power. It's easier to get the principal reduction, all that. But here's my one caveat, guys. If you do a sandwich lease purchase, when you are setting it up, I want you to have the seller sign a mortgage to you for what you think the equity is in the property. I don't care if it's only like 10,000 or something and you don't have a big spread, but what you think the current equity in the house is, I want you to have the seller sign a mortgage on the property for that amount to you, because then when your people cash out down the road, and I don't care if it's even this lease purchase buyer could move out and another one could move in. But whenever somebody cashes you out down the road, the mortgage company is going to look at this. And if you don't have that mortgage on there, they're going to say, okay, and how you're structuring this is your seller and buyer are doing it. You're not in the deal. You're supposed to just get an assignment fee. And I'm just going to warn you that sometimes the mortgage company doesn't like this assignment fee idea, and they don't see it like a second mortgage. If you put it on a second mortgage though, and it was set up 2 years ago, 10 years ago or something, mortgage companies got no qualms about, sending you a demand letter basically and saying, what do we owe you? And so they pay you off like a second mortgage at the end. Now, if you didn't do it this way, you talk to your attorney and you're going to have to set it up like an assignment fee, and you're going to have to work with the lender, and hopefully they can do it the right way. And so just be aware of that. You got to set it up right from the beginning, or else your back end payday, the mortgage lender may give you a challenge. All right, so that's a lot of information. I know, guys, I went a little bit longer than usual. Let's take our deep breaths. Ready? Deep breath in. Big smile. Oh, let it out. That always feels good, and I mark it on my chart. 3 times a day, I try to do 3 deep breaths. Okay, deep breath in. A little bit, and a big smile as always. Let it out. Okay, one more. Deep breath in. Hold it in. Let it go. Okay, Thursday is setup day for the weekend. So it's the day that I want you, for sure, you should have a half-hour calling slot scheduled every Thursday, sometime during the day or evening, where you're trying to set up appointments to go see people's houses on Saturday and Sunday. This should be your regular rhythm. Thursday is a big day for calling. I mean, let's face it, if it's a good deal and they'll see it tonight, if you call them on Thursday at 6 p.m. and they'll see you at 7:30 p.m., get over there. But it's a good way to set up, appointments when people are available. Both spouses, remember, need to be there on the weekend. So Thursday's a good day. We're going to be live with you on Thursdays, live with the Wolves, as always, at 7 p.m. Eastern time, 4 p.m. Pacific. So don't miss that. And that's always a lot of fun. And Lynette's always out in the field looking at one of our houses, or a house we're buying, a house we're fixing, or a house we're selling. So it's always interesting. I think she might have a really good property. I think she might be going out. Yeah, today she's going out to one of our properties that we're maybe trying to sell this weekend. We're getting it all fixed up, and I don't know what the state of condition is, but maybe you can help us do our final walkthrough and sort of figure out what we still need to do on this house. So definitely join us today. It's going to be really good, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Help us out with that. And until I see you next time, keep expecting success, getting awesome training, and of course, taking lots of action.